Majority of people think that science is neutral, that knowledge belongs to whoever discovers it, and that patents and paywalls are just part of that progress, and they're normal. But once knowledge becomes property, it stops being about truth and starts being about control. This video shows what happens when a science becomes something owned and what open source knowledge does differently. It'll also look at what a science of empathy might look like. So, if knowledge is meant to benefit everyone, why is it so much of it locked away? Drugs and Addiction, an Anarchist Perspective. Dickie Dredd. This is part 44 in the video series, and it's the end of chapter 5, Science, Scale and Lies. Section 45, Open Source Knowledge and Anarchist Science. Every revolution in knowledge begins by kicking down a gate. Science guards its discoveries behind paywalls, patents and prestige, a strange kind of enlightenment that charges admission. The irony is cosmic. A discipline born from curiosity now sells wonder by subscription. In an age of open data and decentralized networks, that monopoly looks as dated as a dial-up modem. The future of knowledge, like the future of society, depends on whether information is treated as property or as a commons. The open source movement showed how it can work. When Richard Stallman proposed free software as a moral rather than technical principle, he wasn't just talking about code, he was talking about freedom. Share it, adapt it, improve it together. That spirit runs through permaculture, mutual aid, and the ragtag labs of real science outside of the academy. Where markets prize secrecy, the anarchist scientist prizes replication. Truth grows by being tested, not trademarked. A quiet rebellion now hums through basements and backrooms. Citizen scientists sequence genomes in kitchens. Psychedelic co-ops host group integration circles without a corporate logo in sight. A few brave journals experiment with open peer review. The establishment sneers, of course. Amateurs, unsafe, unlicensed. Yet these projects embody a deeper truth. Knowledge suffocates when it stops moving. Prainsack calls it participatory epistemology, research shaped not by hierarchy but by reciprocity. It runs on trust, not tenure. Open data brings open risk. Without the padded walls of institutions, mistakes become public. So does learning. Unlike corporate secrecy, which hides error until it becomes disaster, open source science composts failure into future growth. Transparency is messy, which is why it works. In a world addicted to control, honesty itself becomes subversion. The psychedelic revival makes this urgent. As companies race to patent psilocybin analogues, open source researchers are releasing synthesis methods and trial data into the public domain. Their argument is simple and ethical. The molecules that heal shouldn't be owned. The mind is the final commons. I made the same case in the book Practical Anarchy. Stewardship must replace possession. The scientist, like the grower, cultivates fertility, not enclosure. Open science also puts the fun back in function, invites patients, hackers and the merely curious to join the experiment. In citizen-run mushroom trials and open lab climate projects, the line between researcher and research blurs nicely. Knowledge becomes a shared jam session, more baseline than boardroom. The parallels with permaculture aren't just poetic. Both chase sustainability through diversity and decentralization. Monocultures of crops or of thought breed fragility. An anarchist science would mimic the forest, self-organising, resilient, quietly untidy. Its success would be measured not in citations or patents, but in the health of the ecosystems. Science, like consciousness, thrives when it breathes. The goal isn't to torch institutions, but to make them transparent. When data, methods and meanings circulate freely, discovery becomes a collective art again. The dream that began with Pythagoras and resurfaced in open source code might finally take root in open-minded research, a science without masters, devoted not to control, but to care. Section 46, Towards the Science of Empathy. 20th century science was built on separation. Observer from observed, mind from matter, fact from feeling. The next revolution will have to undo that division. Progress will not come from new instruments, but from new relationships. A science of empathy would restore what the laboratory gaze extracted: humility, transparency, and care. Empathy is not sentiment, it is method. It begins with the simple truth that observation changes what is observed. The physicist, the psychologist, and the mystic all face the same paradox. To see clearly, one must participate. Varela et al. Call this the inactive approach, knowledge arising from interaction rather than detachment. To understand the mind, we must include the mind doing the understanding. Such a shift demands new definitions of rigour. The sterile neutrality once mistaken for objectivity becomes an obstacle to truth. In addiction research, controlled trials have measured the substance but ignored the setting, reducing pain to numbers and recovery to compliance. The trauma-informed and psychedelic studies discussed earlier point instead to participation as ethics. Subjects are not data points but collaborators. The experiment becomes a conversation. Empathy also requires collective accountability. Dredd and Adams, that's our book that we're coming up on physics, consciousness and reality, describe this as distributed consciousness, a framework where science, art and community co-create meaning. The goal is no longer to measure isolated brains, but to understand networks of relationship between neurons, between people, between societies and their environments. Even physics, once the template of reductionism, is moving that way. Quantum theory, complexity science and ecology all suggest what mystics knew. Separation is illusion. Coherence arises from cooperation. To practice empathy in science is to practice politics. It means dismantling hierarchies of expertise that silence lived experience. It means recognising that a recovering addict, a festival medic, or a parent at a welfare tent may hold insights no algorithm can compute. It means learning again to listen. This approach also heals the damage wrought by the war on error, culture of modern research. Transparency replaces fear. Data can be shared without shame because mistakes are not sins but seeds. Such openness mirrors the principles of open source knowledge discussed earlier, stewardship rather than ownership. An empathic science measures not only outcomes but consequences, who benefits, who pays, who is heard. The laboratory becomes a commons of curiosity rather than a fortress of control. When the subject of study is consciousness itself, empathy ceases to be optional, becomes the only credible instrument. A science grounded in empathy does not abandon precision, it extends it into relationship. The next step is therefore inevitable, to bring the same compassion to medicine. If the lab has learned to listen, the clinic must follow. Chapter 6 turns to that challenge, how the medical establishment, built on diagnosis and pharmaceutical certainty, confused symptom for self and cure for control. The empathic revolution in science must now reach the bedside. Healing will only be complete when medicine remembers that too. It remembers that it too is a conversation between equals. The issue then was never just how science works. It's who it serves and whether knowledge is treated as property or something we all take part in. Because when discovery is locked away, truth becomes limited. And when it's shared, it becomes something alive. So if knowledge is meant to expand understanding, why do we keep trying to own it? Chapter 5 ends here. Next, Chapter 6 looks at what happens when the same logic of control moves into medicine itself. So next up will be Chapter 6, Medicine and Misdiagnosis, and Section 47, The Medical Machine, Diagnosis as Doctrine.